Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of SNEED-CAST. I'm your host Alexa, and today our special guest is none other than McTeague Pierce, who happens to be the executive editor over at Packaging Digest. So, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And then today, just to give our viewers a little heads up, we're going to be talking about EPR and its impacts on CPG manufacturing. But before we jump into our episode, just a little background on Lisa. So you actually began your career in media journalism in 1982, and you've been the executive editor at Packaging Digest, as well as Informa Market since 2012, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And since then, you've also become the Secretary General of International Press Packaging Organization since 2023. You've helped to contribute to the industry knowledge base and stay afloat on all things evolving within the packaging space as well.
I do the best I can. There's a lot going on. And actually, Alexa, it's the International Packaging Press Organization. It also goes by IPPO, IPPO.
We'll keep that in mind. So talking about EPR, if we can get right into it, can you kind of explain
Definitely.
what it is, and then what's its original intent within like the packaging space?
Extended producer responsibility is a way of shifting the cost and responsibility of end of life of packaging, typically described as waste, but we all know that empty packaging has value. It shifts the responsibility of whatever it is that happens with that at the end of its life, whether it's going to landfill or trying to recycle it, compost it, whatever, reuse it. And it shifts the financial burden of that away from consumers and municipalities to the, they call it the producer, and the producer is usually the company that sells a product in the package. But some cases that responsibility extends up through the value chain to like the packaging material manufacturer. But primarily it's the brand owner, folks like Coca-Cola and Nestle and Kraft and even, you know, smaller companies too. It's not just for the major consumer packaged goods brands.
Mm-hmm. And then, so within our company, we work a lot with like traceability codes. And I know that those vary across regions and depending on which retailer you're working with. Would you say that EPR legislation also varies across regions? And what are some common elements that businesses need to be made aware of?
Sure, but I realized that I didn't answer the first question, the second part of the first question,
Right.
And that was, what's the reason, you know, why EPR? And quite frankly, it's a pretty broad reason, and that is to minimize the amount of packaging waste and improve the environmental footprint of products, consumer products. And you could minimize waste by making the material, packaging materials recyclable, compostable, reusable, and you also reduce waste by minimizing the amount of packaging materials you have at the beginning. So those are really the four main ways of minimizing packaging waste and helping to improve the environmental situation for the planet. So those are the broad reasons for EPR.
And then out of curiosity, since EPR has been introduced, would you say that it's stuck to its initial intent? Or would you say that it's as effective?
Well, this is debatable because EPR is new here in the United States. Only 5 states have passed legislation around extended producer responsibility, specifically for packaging. There have been other laws on the books in other areas, paint, for example, other electronics, electronic waste, in those areas. But for packaging, this is pretty brand spanking new. And even though 5 states have passed legislation, it's a very slow process for EPR to be implemented. And Oregon earlier this year was the first of those 5 states that had finished writing the law. So the other 4 states have passed laws without anything even written. Well, I shouldn't say anything. I mean, there's a framework of what it is that they want their EPR for packaging programs to do. But Oregon is the first one to actually have it, you know, a kind of like a final draft of that. And each state, one of the reasons why EPR is happening at the state level rather than, say, a national program is each state has its own packaging waste issues. And so they're writing extended producer responsibility laws to address their unique issues. And we can get into that a little bit more, but it's likely that each state will have its own requirements for complying with their packaging EPR law. There will be some commonalities just because, you know, recycling is pretty much the same nationwide for some packaging materials, aluminum beverage cans, for example. But the states are allowed to kind of do their own thing.
Right. And with it being dependent on the state that you're found in, what would you say are some of the common elements that businesses should be aware of?
Okay. Actually, it's whatever products are being sold into that state would need to comply with that regulation regardless of where they're manufactured. Okay? So anything sold in the state. And some of the commonalities are a certain percentage of recycled content in new packages from a date, you know, forward. And that amount, you know, varies. It usually is capped at like 30% because for some packaging materials, once you get above the 30% recycled content threshold, you start to see some quality degradation, maybe some performance issues as well. So recycled content is probably a commonality. Making sure that the materials that you're using are recyclable. So recycled content and recyclable are 2 different things. That is going to be that's going to be common across the packaging EPR laws here in the United States. Some of them will specify some kind of number for perhaps a reduction in the amount of packaging material. And that could be, you know, reducing the amount of plastic that's in an existing package, or it could be a matter of, you know, taking a look at your packaging and maybe instead of a bottle, a carton, and then a case, a box for shipping, maybe you don't have a carton, that your bottles just go into the case and the bottle is the only thing that goes on a store shelf these days. And you save some material by no longer having a carton. And that's something that we saw actually since several decades ago. If you think of underarm deodorant, a lot of those containers used to be in cartons and now virtually none of them are. So that's an example of material reduction. So I talked about recycled content, recyclability, material reduction. Compostability is something that probably will be very specific state by state. So, for example, Oregon's law does specify compostability, compostable packaging, as one of the ways that your packaging could be more environmental and comply with the EPR law. Oregon has a robust, I guess is a way I would define it, a robust compostability structure in the state. Not all states have, most states don't have that. So it's likely that the compostable packaging requirements for EPR laws will be quite different state by state.
Right. And then how would you say, when we're talking about like the consumer packaged goods space, how would you say the EPR regulations are going to affect this particular like sector?
Well, for the companies that sell into the states that have EPR packaging laws, they will be required to pay fees based on how environmental their packaging is or is not. So let's say, for example, this is just, a pretend. Let's say that one of the requirements to comply with the, let's say Oregon's EPR law is that by 2030, and I'm making all of this up, just as an example, let's say by 2030, your packaging needs to have 30% recycled content in it. And if it does, you pay a certain fee. If it does not, you pay more. And so, it's kind of the carrot and the stick, although to me, the EPR laws are a lot more stick than they are carrot, that if you, either way, manufacturers are going to be paying, and the brand owners or producers are going to be paying. It's just a matter of like how much based on whether or not that state sees the package that they're using, at how environmentally friendly they believe that is or not. And, it's all what they write into the law. But I can just imagine that whatever fees companies pay in, they're probably going to pass those fees along in higher product prices. And, I'm not really good with math, but even if it's just 5 states that have that, those fees are going to be substantial, I believe. Maybe other people have a different opinion on that. And it's going to either eat into profits or cause product prices to go up, and I'm betting it'll be the product prices go up. So consumers will pay more, which is a little bizarre when you think that the whole reason for EPR is to transfer the economic responsibility from consumers to the brand owners. And that's one of the reasons that I'm not a big fan of EPR, because it's not going to do what it's setting out to do.
Yeah, no, now that you've explained it, it really sounds like consumers, or us as consumers, we're always just on the shorter end of that stick.
Always.
But yeah, no, it definitely sounds like it. So not only like are financial challenges being posed now, but what other challenges would you say that businesses have in terms of adapting those EPR regulations?
Well, one of the challenges is just keeping track of them all. And most manufacturers will not have a package that's specific to a state that has an EPR law. They'll probably have the same package that's shipped out nationally. Brand owners have a variety of stock keeping units, SKUs anyway. they have no problem keeping track of that, but it just adds additional complexity. And to go one step a little bit further down this particular path, I said that the laws are at the state level, and each state can have a little bit of their own flavor to what they write in the law. But if you think about it, a product manufacturer will probably design their packaging moving forward to comply with the worst case scenario, like which state has the strictest EPR packaging laws. And if they can comply with that, then that one package can literally be shipped throughout the United States without, further concern. But, it's all a matter of you can still do what you want. It just will change how much you pay in fees for the states that have EPR packaging laws.
And then we touched on it briefly where consumers might be, again, on that short end of the stick, where brands might have to eat those costs. But what about in terms of like waste management costs? What are we going to be looking at?
I apologize because I realized that I didn't fully answer your earlier question, though, about what are some of the implications for the producers, the brand owners, the folks who are going to pay. Keeping track of all the metrics is one. The metrics of, what materials they have at what weights for what products, all of that. If you could just imagine a database of all that information and trying to keep track of it, and the larger the company and the more of the products, just exponentially how much data that is. So being able to track, collect, and manage that data is one particular concern. Another one is the amount of time and the manpower of who's going to be doing all that work. Is it going to be the people who work in the sustainability department, or people who work in packaging are going to be required to do that? And if it is the folks who are working in packaging that are going to have to track all this, what is their skill level for figuring all this out? And I know that there are a number of programs and companies out there that will help with this, but you still have to have somebody, whether it's in the sustainability department or the packaging department, who's very detailed. And because this is, it's going to affect the bottom line, the company's bottom line big time in fees. And so the skill level is another thing that I think of that some companies might be struggling with a little bit. And, literally just the manpower, the number of hours that this management is going to take in companies now. Those are pretty much the big things: the cost, the manpower, and the skills.
Right. Out of curiosity, since EPR is so new to the US, is there any type of standardized system to keep track of all of those metrics, or is it going to vary like across state to state, company to company?
It'll vary state to state, company to company, but this goes back to an earlier question that you asked me that I didn't get into yet. And EPR is new here in the United States, but it is not new globally. Okay. I can't pronounce the German phrase, but it's the green dot. It's known as the green dot. It translates to green dot in Germany, and that started a couple of decades ago. I'm drawing a blank now. I had written this down somewhere else, but I don't think I wrote it down in my notes here. I want to say it was early 2000s is when the green dot came into being in Germany. And I don't know if you're familiar, but now in Europe, the PPWR, which is the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation, PPWR, is the European equivalent of America's EPR packaging laws.
Mhm.
And PPWR is a evolution of the green dot. So you might question then whether or not was the green dot successful.
Mhm.
It did improve the recycling rates of empty packages, but it's still, I would have to see some real hard numbers and dig into them a little bit more, because even as those packaging material recycling rates increased, so did the amount of just the pool of packaging waste. So, you know, is Europe ahead of the game? Well, I would pretty much say no, because that's one of the reasons why they're working on the PPWR. So to be even better than what they were able to do with the green dot.
Right.
But there is something to point to.
Mhm.
Successful EPR program in Europe, the green dot, and then now the PPWR, but Americans are not Europeans. We do things a little bit differently here. So it is yet to be seen whether or not US EPR packaging laws will work.
Right. And then we talked about a little bit, or we talked a little bit about the financial burdens that we might face as consumers, as well as some of the costs that companies are going to be taking on since EPR is now coming into the picture. But when
Mhm.
we talk about waste management, what kind of costs are we going to be seeing there?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of EPR regulations,
Mhm.
because nowhere have I seen that the states that have and will have EPR packaging laws has the waste management fees for consumers been reduced? No. Have their taxes gone down for, you know, municipalities covering some of the cost of waste management? Nobody's talking about that either. So again, like I say, I'm just not a fan. I do see 4 flaws in extended producer responsibility here in the United States, and
Mhm.
costs, you know, that shifting of the cost is one of them. The other one is to improve recycling rates. You really need to get the consumer involved in this, because they're the ones who have the empty packages when they're done consuming whatever product it is. And they're the ones making the decision to either put it in the recycle bin, if it can go in it, or throw it away. And there's nothing being written into the EPR laws that incentivize consumers to recycle more. So to me, I see that as an absolute missed opportunity, I guess.
Mhm.
And then there's 2 others, and give me a few minutes and I'll rethink what those were.
No
Sorry
worries.
about that. I should have had it in front of me here.
No,
I
no
thought I would
worries.
remember off the cuff.
If anything, and I feel like I'm already going to know the answer to this. Do you feel like EPR is going to be a viable solution going forward, or do you think it's just overhyped at this point?
I think it's a little overhyped. However, one of the things that I'm keeping an open mind about
Hmm.
is that, as I mentioned earlier, these laws are still being written.
Right.
Some of the flaws that I see in, I remembered what a third one was. So
Okay.
shifting of the cost isn't really going to happen.
Hmm.
Consumers aren't incentivized to recycle more. And then once the material is collected and recycled, there's nothing in the EPR law, nothing much in the EPR law to help with the resale of that recyclate, that material that's been recycled. Depends on the material, but, and there are, as I mentioned, in the EPR laws, some of them do have minimum percentages of recycled content. So that creates a business case for the recycled materials, depending on, again, on what they are. What was your question again? Whether it's viable or not. So I have an open mind because a lot of these laws are still being written. And some of the flaws that I see in the system can be addressed. Whether they will be and whether or not they're going to make any kind of a difference. I thought of the fourth one. The fourth one is that once an EPR law is implemented, there's no end in sight. So there's no future where we can say we're done. We finished, and everything that we want, we achieved everything that we wanted. It's an ongoing program. That means producers will always pay into it. So there's never, I look at it as making the decision of whether you're going to buy a car or lease a car. If you lease a car, you're always going to have a payment. If you buy a car, once you're done making your payments for whatever the length of the loan is, then you can still own that car without the financial burden of having to continue to pay for it. To me, that's kind of what my analogy with EPR laws is. It's, you're leasing a car from now until the end of time. And I have, from an economic point of view, I have a real problem with that.
Right. And then is there any reason why industry experts are now trying to advocate more for like bottle bills as opposed to like EPR?
Okay, bottle bills are definitely an option. However, my primary residence is in Illinois, does not have a bottle bill. I have a summer cottage in Michigan, which does have a bottle bill. Whenever I spend time in Michigan, I do collect and redeem as many packages that have bottle bill fees associated with them as possible. As a consumer, I absolutely hate the inconvenience, the mess, the amount of space I have because you can't crush these packages. They have to be full so that they go through the scanning system. It's a pain in the butt. And as a consumer, absolutely hate it. Does it increase the recycling rates for those particular bottles? Yes. It's very limited. Single use, even, multi-serve beverage bottles, pretty much the packages that are contained in a bottle bill. Sure, you're collecting those at a much higher rate. So it is successful in incentivizing consumers, although I think most of the consumers are like me. They go kicking and screaming into this program. So it is an option. It is not the most elegant option. I have proposed a couple other things that I think are a little bit more elegant. I'm a big proponent of closed loop systems, which means an individual manufacturer sets up a program for recycling their own packaging. And we've seen some success with this. It could be at an event. It could be in a particular town. So these are much smaller scale programs, but their success rate has been pretty high. As high as the bottle bills, probably not, but immensely higher than I believe EPR is going to get us to here in America.
Right. And then earlier we had mentioned the EPR is relatively new here. What do you think is something that we can learn from international organizations that have already implemented like EPR regulations?
Well, one of the things that people point to is multinational companies
Mm-hmm.
have been capturing this data and managing their EPR programs elsewhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that perspective, they've got a little bit of a leg up because they already have the tools and hopefully the people in place to do that. But it's still going to be a learning curve for a lot of other companies here in the United States, selling into those states here in the United States.
Right. And then I know one of the things that international organizations sometimes do is when it comes down to their incentives. I know that there are places where you can take like your bottles or your packages, you're able to return them and you're able to get some type of monetary value or some type of credit from that. Is that something that you think we're going to see here implemented like within the US?
We're already seeing that. That actually is the definition of a bottle bill.
Okay,
You
okay.
pay a fee when you buy the product, and then as the
Right.
consumer, you're responsible for returning that and
Mhm.
getting your fee back.
Okay.
So that exists with bottle bills, but it also exists with some other programs. So one particular example, this is not the only one,
Mhm.
but the folks at TerraCycle, I don't know if you're familiar with the company TerraCycle. They're
Yeah.
a upcycling, recycling company. Okay,
Okay.
the founder, CEO of that, Tom Zaki, also created Loop, which is a reusable packaging program,
Mhm.
and he's had some success with that. A lot of success actually right now in France with that. But the whole idea of that is you buy a product, it has a fee associated with it. When you return that product, when you return that empty package, which is
Mhm.
then cleaned and refilled by the manufacturer, you get your fee back. So there are programs like that. They're, again, not necessarily as popular with consumers because of the convenience or lack of convenience factor in it. Although Tom at Loop really did think through how to make it as convenient as possible for consumers. And I think that's one of the reasons why Loop was as successful as it was.
And going forward, what are some future regulation trends that you see in the foreseeable future? Something that companies have to keep in mind or that you would recommend keeping in mind?
Well, I think we are going to continue to see states propose and possibly pass packaging EPR laws
Mhm.
here. I'm not sure exactly how many, depending on how you figure the count. Several months ago, before the current federal administration, there were, I believe, up to 19 additional states that were working on or considering packaging EPR laws. I believe the enthusiasm for extended producer responsibility laws here in the United States has softened a bit,
Mhm.
but I do think that we're still going to continue to see other states pass some regulation on packaging EPR. Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for all of the great information. I feel like it's always
You're
interesting to hear
welcome.
different opinions on EPR. I feel like you either really love it or you end up giving us the truth behind it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, like I say, I see flaws, but one of the reasons why I speak out about the flaws
Mhm.
is because I truly do believe in a circular economy. It makes sense not only from an environmental point of view, but definitely from a financial point of view, we should really be using the materials to their utmost, end use. But that being the case, I'm not convinced that EPR is going to do what it is that we're proposing it do. And
Right.
yet, once it's implemented, even if it isn't doing what it's supposed to do, we're kind of going to be stuck into continuing with it, forever. And that's where I have a big problem. That's why I'm speaking up. If we can address some of these flaws and rewrite the bills or rethink EPR here in America, that's what I hope will happen.
Right. And then if our viewers wanted to know more about the behind the scenes when it comes to like EPR regulation and everything, what resources would you advise them to go look into? Or would you say the Packaging Digest is a pretty good place to start?
We're a pretty good place to start, although we don't dive into EPR as deeply because we're covering so many different topics.
Right.
Truly, I think you kind of need to go to the source.
Okay.
So Circular Action Alliance is right now, I believe, the only producer responsibility organization, also called a PRO, PRO, that will manage the packaging-related EPR laws for different states. States, you can have more than one PRO manage your program, but a couple of states have already selected Circular Action Alliance, CAA, as their PRO. And so a lot of what is happening with packaging EPR here in America, I would definitely keep track of what CAA is doing.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that, Lisa. And again, thank you so much for joining us here on SNEED-CAST. It
My
was an honor.
pleasure. Thank you, Alexa. Me too. I had fun.
Thank you.